Bahrain? I don't know. Is that in the Middle East? I have no idea.
Yeah, Bahrain comes under us as well.
They said, "Oh, I wish we'd known it," because I put something on Facebook this morning and they didn't know about it. So I said, "I don't know how it's publicised. I haven't seen anything on Twitter, but will it be publicised on there so that people can access it?"
Yes, it comes from, like I say, the BSME organisers, which isn't us. I'm just the network lead for drama. We've got certain people. A lady called Olivia Roth oversees it all, and another lady called Rachel. So they're the one that send out the marketing. It does go to all of the schools, because I know my school received it, to then advertise with all of the staff there. I don't know how else they market it, to be quite honest.
Okay, lovely. And is it available for people who aren't in BSME or not?
I don't think so, but like I say, we do have recordings of it, so if anybody needed anything, it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, lovely. Right, shall I let you get on? I don't know whether you've got loads to do, and I'll just sit and watch and enjoy, and then...
Yeah, if you just, like I say, mute, etc. We'll be going live with my beautiful face on the big screen at 2.
Now, do I?
No, yeah, you can mute now, that's no problem. It'll go live at 2. You'll hear me introduce
Sarah?
Zena, talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, it is now live and your audio goes through.
They can't hear me, can they, Mohammed?
Yes, they can.
Oh, you went live really early. There's no attendees, right?
There one attendee.
Okay, apologies for anybody that's listening where we haven't started properly and you've heard my lovely voice. We'll be starting properly at 2, where I introduce our guest speakers. Good afternoon and welcome to the second drama webinar for British schools in the Middle East. My name is Sarah Kelly and I am the Director of Performing Arts at Dubai English Speaking College. Today's webinar is titled The New Normal and the Changing Face of Theatre in Schools. We're delighted to welcome our speakers today, Zina Rashid and Mark Wheeler. Zina is the Vice Chair and Reviews Editor of National Drama. Zina studied at Bretton Hall and Central School and has achieved AST and Leadership certification. In this session, Zina will explore ways of addressing the limits of lockdown as creative opportunities for different practices, inspired by practitioners, including Theatre Centre, Splendid and Paper Birds. Due to a prior teaching commitment, Zina has kindly recorded her webinar in order for us to use today. Please share any questions or comments you may have for Zina in the chat bar that you can see down the bottom of your screen. I'll monitor these throughout the session and forward them on to Zina at the end. Just a reminder that this webinar is recorded. It can be referred to at any point and please do share it with your colleagues at school. I'll now be sharing my screen, so just bear with me for one moment.
Hello everyone from Zina and welcome to my short webinar, The New Normal and the Changing Face of Theatre in Schools. My name is Zina Rashid. I've been teaching for 20, maybe 25 years. I started teaching when I was off travelling in Sri Lanka, largely by accident. And then came back and have been teaching I started in Peterborough and then in North Sheffield and more recently in Barnsley. This is my 6th year in a Barnsley school. I trained at Bretton Hall in Yorkshire. I did my PGCE at Homerton, a Masters at Central. I've got an AST and I also have done some leadership qualifications. So I teach. There's an essential that's represented by the essential knowledge sheet for year 8, as you can see there. We do shows every year. The photograph is from a lovely Lear that we did a couple of years ago. We were in the middle of rehearsing We Will Rock You before lockdown. I'm also the Vice Chair and Reviews Editor for National Drama. And some of the things we do, as you can see from the video still there that I've included, is put together material that champions and celebrates drama and talks about why drama is really important in our education system. So we have some problems at the moment. Here are just a few. I'm not going to read them to you, but problems for me that might be shared from you is the feeling that you find it very difficult to teach if you're stuck behind a hazard line or behind your desk, that you want to be with the children, that you want to inspire them with live theatre and that whole experience, and that's quite difficult, that your lesson plans, you know, for physical theatre and for contact and for using body language and gestures, all need thinking about in a socially distant, COVID-safe classroom, that you might need to limit children's group work or children's moving around the classroom. Some of you might be teaching at desk, even for GCSE and BTEC and post-16 classes. Some of you might be teaching remotely altogether, you know, so you're not in the same building with the children. They're at home, you're at home. How do you manage without the joy of enrichment? You know, the different opportunities for learning there are so important. So some of the problems, I'm sure you can think of more, but although I was really looking forward to seeing my kids again and teaching them, these were some of the things that, you know, I definitely had to sort of consider. So I did a lot of online CPD and Zoom sessions over lockdown, and I have to say, I don't regret any of them. They were brilliant. So National Drama did some, but I did a lot. You know, I did with Paper Birds, with Lung Theatre, with Theatre Centre. I was on a lot of Facebook pages. So one of the sort of silver linings of lockdown is that drama teachers actually came out into the digital world and communicated with each other, and a lot of theatres and companies put some amazing resources out there around writing, around performing. You know, I saw some amazing national theatre shows. So I'm sure you will have done the same, and I've kind of put these together. And some of the best advice that was shared, I suppose, that a lot of the theatre companies had in common said, well, rather than thinking about the problems of devising socially distanced drama, of performing, of teaching drama in a COVID-safe way, think about what you can do. You know, we are all creative people. Let's think about those limits as opportunities, and it might be difficult and some ideas might work more than others, but I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. There was also some lovely stuff on the BBC where they wrote theatrically but recorded it as sort of Zoom theatre on Unprecedented. They're very short, so perfect for sharing in school. And I think they show you what's possible, and I think could be very inspiring. Obviously, you will watch them first and all of that. Talking heads, of course, are monologues, and monologues can look really easy but be really difficult. So that's my one, maybe think about, but beautiful performances. So Theatre Centre have been going for about 30 years, I think, and they were brilliant. They invited teachers and students to do online free writing workshops with really talented new voices, new playwrights, people who are in their 20s and 30s, with companies and different ways of looking at things. And all of the sessions are on their website for us to access. So even if you didn't do the session live, and I think there are brilliant ideas in each of those sessions to help children write creatively, devise through writing, write around themes and issues, create exciting first scenes, and they're quite personal and they're very inclusive, really fun to do. So, you know, I've definitely used a lot of those ideas for remote learning and for classroom learning, and they would work with desks beautifully. They've also got a brilliant resource called Imagination, which they did over lockdown, where people uploaded short extracts and sent them to Theatre Centre, who put them together. And I've put one link there. Again, looking at what you might be able to do if you can't do live performance to audience. So we know what we can't do. What can we do? So we can't do connection, we can't do close, we can't do physical contact, but we can maybe use placards. We can use a mix of projections and live theatre, or recorded students and live theatre. We might have the performers in one place and the performance recorded and that being shown in another room. You might, rather than using connection, you might use different levels and use your stage blocks in more imaginative ways. Just because you can't use contact, you can still make the movement and the gesture really central to your work. And I think if you have a look at some of the Imagination work, or you have a look at On the Run Theatre Company, or Ubu that's on at the moment, you can see this happening. There are lots of ideas for how you can use movement and gesture in really exciting ways, even though in your heart you might be thinking, I really wanted them to use lifts and balances. There are alternatives. So triangle formations, unison, mirroring. You could use sort of the invisible string exercises and also think about distanced combat. So maybe you haven't got the connection, but you have got the response at 2 meters apart, and that might symbolically be really interesting and definitely worth playing with. We've got a long list here of UK theatre companies who've got amazing offers online that I think might be really worth investing in or having a look at. Obviously, theatre companies have had a really hard time, and some of them are reinventing the wheel to support teachers. Obviously, the theatre companies are in some ways our sort of bread and butter. So it's really great if we can network with them and maybe support them too. Some of them have got really excellent CPD available as well. Andrew Loretto is a really amazing theatre practitioner. He started work, or I met him when he was setting up Sheffield People's Theatre. Then he moved to Doncaster and did community theatre work and theatre for sort of social cohesion. He was about to open a new musical at Cast, and he also leads the Winchester Hat Fair, which is a festival of outdoor work. Now, he very rarely, he doesn't know where the box is to think in. He thinks way out of boxes. And actually, he did a CPD session that I went to and had wonderful ideas like, what if you had a smaller cast, 4 students? What if they worked outside? Maybe you've got some interesting outdoor spaces in your school. Maybe you have tennis courts or steps or stairwells inside the building. Maybe you have balconies. Maybe, now it's getting dark quite early, you can have fairy lights in the trees and have the children sort of snuggled up warm. You would need to think about lighting and amplification, obviously. But if you had torches and a way of solving those problems, you could create some really lovely Christmas readings or sung sessions if it was a small group, obviously. It's definitely worth thinking about. Maybe some spectacles with big costumes rather than huge casts and big audiences. There's a thing on the right-hand side from The Guardian where they routinely have up-to-date information of live online theatre and performance, which might be useful for you or your students. If you've got a technician or you have good technical skills or you've got time to learn some, we couldn't do our primary school tour this year, so we sort of put a structure together, and then as households, children uploaded short extracts with placards and their families, and we put that with some footage of the school, and they created a welcome for Year 6s that was friendly and effective and warm, but didn't involve us going into closed primary schools. You might be able to flip rehearsal, so to limit rehearsal time, so that children go away, learn short sections of scripts or words, maybe that they've written themselves, and then come back with these learnt rather than learning them by doing, and then rehearse them in their bubble with you in shorter rehearsals and fewer of them. We're thinking about recording 15 very short performances, one song, a little bit of The Night Before Christmas, Christmas Carol, the Carol Ann Duffy, there's some lovely Christmas stuff that she wrote. And then we'll send them home as windows until it makes like a sort of advent calendar of performances that people can open through our website. So that might be things that, things that keep drama high profile and keep, that purpose of drama to sort of build the community and make people feel together without actually all being in your traditional performance space. I think generally, when I don't have a year 11, I feel quite sad. But this year, I think I maybe feel differently about that. But I have got a year 10, and I am going to try and get them audiences, small, socially distanced. We normally do, you know, drinks and biscuits. We won't do that. And we'll have to think about the spacing of it to keep distance. But I think I will prioritise live audiences for them, because I think their exam and their assessments are still likely, can't say anything for sure, to be live, but obviously I will record everything that I can, and I will record their live performances as well. So I've got two sort of ideas here for how you might create lessons in a secure way. One is inspired by the wonderful Lung Theatre, and one inspired by the equally wonderful Splendid Theatre. So Lung Theatre, I was thinking about how might I do this if it was completely remote, maybe the year group's on lockdown and I've got to set them lessons they can do on a computer. So maybe they could do a short amount of research on an accessible topic. So you could do anything. You could do well-being, you could do mental health, you could do cyberbullying, you could do climate change, you could do the oceans, you could look at politics, you could look at school uniform, you could look at effects of disadvantage, exams this summer, you know. So for the sake of argument, freedom of speech. So I very rarely tell students to just go off and do research, because it's like pushing them down a well. I tend to say, look at this website or this thing. So maybe they could look at the Anna Lazarus poem, the new Colossus on the Statue of Liberty, and you know, your poor, your huddled masses. Maybe the Nina Simone song, Oh, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free. You could look at an article on the Belarus elections, or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela sort of speeches. You know, I'd find like 3 or 4 things that I think would be appropriate for that class or that year group. And then I would ask them to use their phones to record the people in their house, either answering 3 open questions like, how does freedom feel for you? Or why is freedom important? Or what is freedom of speech? Or I would just say, can you talk to me about freedom and freedom of speech for 30 seconds? Can you tell me about that? So they maybe have 2 to 5 tiny recordings, couple of minutes of material. I would then ask them to learn it sort of in a verbatim way, a bit of Lecky Blythe, as it is said, with their headphones in. So it is at their computers, but it is creative and it is relevant to theatre work, you know, contemporary theatre work. They might then add in quotes or lyrics or extracts from plays or their own words that they found around freedom. And they would learn that. They would learn that for coming back to school. If they were off for a bit longer, I would do this at home, but hopefully they could do this when we get back in class. They would then transfer that to a non-verbal version using gestures, silences, breath, body shapes, posture, travel, and teach that to each other. That then has given me, let's say I've got a class of 20, at least 40 minutes of amazing material to improvise around on my theme. And I think that could potentially be a really exciting piece of devised work, which you started through remote learning, and it's still meaningful. On the Splendid Theatre, and I'm going to hurry up now, thinking of a Marmite character like Medea or Fagin. And this is for a socially distanced live lesson. In threes, create a non-verbal sequence in praise of that character, thinking about that lovely Jacques Lecoq quote. So, you know, if it was Greta Thunberg, 8 motifs, 8 movements that would really praise everything she stands for and everything she says. Then they do the same, but opposing what she said. Then they do the same, but questioning what she said. Another lovely top tip you could give them is from Kerry Simpson, who's a great fan of Simpsons. And Matt Groening said that one of the things that's important in the Simpsons is that you can tell every character from their silhouette. Can your actors make their attitude really clear from their silhouette? They can develop this with breath, sound, gestures. They can deconstruct it, they can split it up, they can extend it, they can slow motion it. Then they can think about how they put Greta's speech or the Marmite character's speech back into that chorus performance and think about what that might achieve theatrically. Does it say something important or illuminating? So hopefully that's nearly 20 minutes. That's given you some good ideas that might help you find a new normal in 2020, 2021, who knows, further forward, by thinking smaller, by accessing CPD, by investing in yourself and your learners in new times, by sharing good ideas, you know, by using the tech available to us as a good thing, focusing on what you can do. But really, I think our core business remains the same. You know, I am still really passionate about the teaching in my classroom. It's just a bit different, but it's still really important. About the volunteer work I do with National Drama and bringing teachers together and championing drama. And about that live performance. So they're sort of still at the heart of what I do, and I hope that's been of some use. Any feedback, please, hopefully if you let BSME know, they'll pass it back to me. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully everybody can hear me again now as we return back to the BSME conference. I'm sure you'll all agree they were really interesting points made from Zena that has hopefully inspired a little bit for everybody regarding work when it comes to being socially distanced. Again, as Zena mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to forward them to me. I will forward them to Zena in order for us to be able to gain some responses. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our second speaker for today's session, Mark Wheeler. I'm sure many of you know Mark is one of the most performed living playwrights. His plays Too Much Punch for Judy has been performed over 6,000 times and is fortunately also available on DVD. Mark also runs workshops across the world. I myself have been fortunate enough to work with him when he travelled over to Dubai a few years ago. And in this question and answer session, Mark looks forward to answering questions about how drama can remain alive and well in this new normal also. So Mark, if I can pass over to you, perhaps with the first question, just to get us started, about why you became a writer and what or who was your biggest inspiration?
Oh, wow. My inspiration was David Bowie, not a theatre person at all. Well, I would argue he was a theatre person. When I was 14, I went to see him perform his Ziggy Stardust or Aladdin Sane show, and he did a magical thing at the very beginning of the show, which was the Spiders from Mars, his backing band, were playing, and then suddenly he appeared, and I had no idea how that happened. And he did this piece of magic, and I thought, I want to do some of that. So I tried to become a rock star. I failed, and in the end, my plays, because I wrote songs, and in order to get them performed, I wrote musicals. So, well, I got friends to write musicals around my songs. That managed to get the songs performed, which was great. But the plays, I ran out of people to ask to write plays for me. And I ended up writing plays because the plays became more important to me, I guess. And I also realise, and this didn't happen till quite a long time afterwards, that why I got into David Bowie wasn't the music, which is what I thought it was. It was actually the words and the image and the lyrics of the songs, even though they don't make a whole heap of sense. That's what intrigued me. So the title, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, I basically bought that album on the strength of the title and the picture, because I went into one of those listening booths, and the two songs they happened to play me, I wasn't that keen on, but I still bought them because of the words. But it took me a long while to realise that.
Fascinating. That actually links quite nicely onto our second question, so you might have touched upon it, but just to develop. So the first hook that gets you started for a new play, is it normally then music, or like you said, then particular words that inspire you?
Well, originally I was writing plays to entice students, because I was a teacher for over 35 years. So I was writing plays to entice students to want to be involved. So my inspiration was really kind of back to front. It was, I need to get these people doing a play, therefore I've got to find something interesting. An example of that is this, which is the play about Graham Salmon, who's the world's fastest blind runner. And if I just start talking about him, as I would have done to the people who I first got involved in that play, you'll see that he becomes a hook. So he lost his eyesight when he was, he lost his first eye when he was 6 months old. He lost his second eye when he was 18 months old. So he was blind. He didn't ever remember sight. He doesn't see anything, not black nor white. He sees what your knee sees. He sees nothing. So as soon as you start to talk that, you get kids thinking, wow, that's quite an interesting idea, and they're hooked. And then you tell them, and he went on to become the world's fastest blind runner. What's your fastest time in 100 meters? And they'll tell you whatever their time is. He managed to run 100 meters in 11.5 seconds. How does he do it? You know, and there are all these questions. So they're then hooked in. Can we meet him is the next thing. And so then he comes in, he does a demonstration run, and, you know, the play is kind of there. What that offered us was amazingly complex challenges. Like, he also went on to hit a hole-in-one in golf, which for a blind person, he's the only person ever to have done it in a competition. But we had to stage the 400 meters final. And it took me about 6 years to manage to get that properly done. We didn't have frantic assembly. We didn't have those groups that perform things. I did have Hull Truck. We went to see them do Up and Under, and they staged a rugby match. And when I compared that was in the same year as we first did the play about Graham. I knew we hadn't done it well enough because we didn't get the audience up and cheering. So the next time I did the play, I said to them, said to my group, this is our target. We've got to find a way of doing this that will get the audience up and cheering. And we did. And it was just, so the motivation was like theatre challenges or people or something that crops up in the classroom. Too Much Punch for Judy, which you mentioned, was born out of a girl whose dad was a recovering alcoholic, and her talking about that, and that kind of led to Too Much Punch for Judy. Hard to Swallow was I had a girl in Too Much Punch for Judy who had anorexia, and so that led to, and she was called Joe the Unicorn because she played a unicorn in the production, hence Joe the Goat in Hard to Swallow. And it's kind of one thing leads to another, and now I'm in the very fortunate position of being asked to write plays and commissioned to write plays. So the incentive becomes lots of money and people saying, do you want to write a play about blah? And often it's, yeah, that would be lovely. And you're paying me? Great, okay. So yeah, that's how, but originally it was for a group. That now, because I have, oh, the meeting has ended. Have I gone?
No, you're definitely still there.
Okay.
Teasing you.
I had a little sign saying the meeting has ended.
Right.
So it was originally to motivate my students and get them involved. And what I discovered then also was I'd always been brought up to believe you have to do a musical in order to get an audience in. We got audiences and TV coverage and all sorts as a result of the plays that we, in a very humble school, it was a kind of down at heel school, we did, and we got amazing worldwide attention. It was fantastic.
It sounds it, and some incredible stories there, particularly with the blind man. I know myself, I've taught Too Much Punch for Judy and Hard to Swallow, and so they're really relatable, like you say, to young people, the themes and issues. If you were sort of trying to give advice to perhaps aspiring playwrights, would you say there's any special ingredients or top tips that you might be able to give them if they were starting off?
Yes, get your plays performed, and that's the most important thing. And I say that from experience, because if people ask me to read plays occasionally, I always say no, because I want to see a play. I don't want to read one. And if someone has the kind of you have to become a director if no one else is going to put it on, and you have to put it on yourself. That's what I did. I didn't have any training in doing this. It was just, I need to get this on stage. Right, we'll do it. And in fact, probably before the Graham play, Race to be Seen, before that, I hadn't seen much theatre. We saw theatre when we went to Edinburgh, and I saw Woes at Albert and Up and Under and Bouncers that year, which dated it. That was 1983 or 4. So we learnt as we went along all together. I mean, the students I was working with knew no less, no more than me. We learned together.
What an interesting piece of advice, like you say, to get people to perform, not just to read, so it takes it from page to stage, which is so important for them.
And then get it judged by someone outside, because you can't just, it can't be, and I find even now, I'm still blowing my own trumpet so often, because no one else does it for you. So I have to do that. But I do have, and occasionally I'll say to a drama teacher who's read a new play, could you write a review on it? And they do. We would always we very often entered our plays for one-act drama festivals, and there's an official adjudication. We would always pay for the £30 it cost to get the official adjudication. Boy, those have come in handy. And they're handy to help you develop your work. So if you want to go to them just to get the praise, that's not what you can do, because you will get knocked. Dan Nolan, for example, came second to last in the first drama festival we entered, and we got some really good comments, really helpful comments to move it on. One of which was the kids who were acting needed to speak more clearly. We changed that. We really, really worked on it. We then entered a bigger drama festival and we won it. So it was just, you know, that you have to be responsive and be prepared to put yourself up and be knocked down. And we've had many, many knocks. And in rehearsals, many, many evenings, we go home thinking, oh, that was awful. Should we bother to continue? And most of us come back and do.
So I suppose it's that passion. You've got to really want that drive, and like you say, act on the feedback, and it's very much a process.
Yes, absolutely.
Thinking about obviously the current situation that we're in, do you believe that the current challenges facing our sort of Generation Z, our school children of today, will provide inspiration for future work, sort of the situations and the challenges that might actually inspire some plays in the future?
Oh, without doubt, yeah. And I'm not belittling the huge task. I'm very, very glad I'm not a teacher in this time. I think I'd find it incredibly frustrating, incredibly hard, and all the things, the unknowns, like is so-and-so going to be in school tomorrow? And not so-and-so individually, but a whole group of people, are they going to be in school? I would find that an absolute nightmare. But I know I would have tried to find ways to deal with that, to compensate it, and to do something special. I'd say to them, we've got to do something special so that we can prove we are worthwhile and we are achieving something. So yes, it's affected. I've got a group called Tie It Up Theatre, who tour Hard to Swallow and I Love You Mum around England. What Dan Spargo Mabs Foundation, who are the I Love You Mum people, said they were going to put all the money from the tour in Scotland into making a virtual film. So they did that, and they've now made, it's just become available, in fact, in the last 2 weeks, they've made a virtual film of I Love You Mum, I Promise I Won't Die. And that's now, of course, available worldwide, which it wasn't before. So I think there's a little publicity sheet that's going around that you guys have got that you can see. So, I mean, have a look at that. There's an advert online. That's how one theatre company have chosen to keep themselves in work and also offer things for schools. For me personally, I was finding that I was getting all sorts of requests from teachers to help. And was having to say, so photocopying scripts was a huge thing, and it just seemed really awkward. I had to say no because of my income, of the publisher, and so on. Then the publisher went bust in the second week of COVID. So I had a new publisher who came on board, which was Salamander Street, who have been fantastic. They've produced ebooks. So again, it's made that change. So all of my scripts through Salamander Street are now available as ebooks. Again, that just, and they've got a worldwide distribution thing. So again, they should be easier to get now. And the third thing is, in the interim, I wanted to do something for free for schools. So I created I'd never done any YouTube before. I created a YouTube channel, and on day 4 of the lockdown, I started telling the Wheeler Plays story. I've now done 96 episodes of it, which goes through every play, and I've been really good and categorized it. So there's playlists. So if you're studying Hard to Swallow, you can go to the Hard to Swallow playlist, and there's me talking about it. There's little extracts from it. And I think that could be really useful for teachers who are just stuck of what are we going to do? And you can set different kids to look up. You can look up The Gate Escape and then do a report back on that. You can look up Kill Jill, do a report back on that. You can look at Race to be Seen. And the whole class can get to know a decent amount about my work just from a 5-minute YouTube clip. So that's a really good potential thing. And I've been amazed by the uptake in that. And some of them have been watched nearly 1,000 times, which is fantastic. And I had no idea.
Such a useful resource. I know for myself, we were in distance learning for 6 months. So anything that was going online, you know, students were like a sponge. They were so keen to be able to explore theatre. So amazing resources.
Just I can get that at home for free.
Yeah. And like Mark alluded to there, on our BSM network pages, you can see his resources, where you can be able to purchase these books and things as well. So please do take a look.
Lovely, thank you.
A number of your plays then draw heavily on first-hand testimony, and therefore sort of the verbatim dialogue that you've got in there. Do you think, again then, with the current pandemic, that style of theatre will still be able to remain, where there's been lots of not people being able to talk to each other in the same way?
Well, interestingly, a number of, so I Love You Mum, I Promise I Won't Die, there has been a production by a youth theatre who had bought the rights to do the play as a performance. They are in the process of doing a Zoom production of it, and they lend themselves perfectly to this because they're interview format. So if you look at how the scripts are, there are times when people speak to one another, but most of the time they're talking to camera effectively. Game Over is a really interesting example because that's the story of Brett Bednar, who was murdered online. So the whole of that play is an online, it kind of suits very naturally an online experience. It's an awful story, but it's a story that, you know, about online grooming that needs to get out there. And Game Over is something that can be used as a very natural way of performing it in a Zoom style or in a socially distant style. So these plays, the verbatim ones that I've written, lend themselves particularly well, by accident, no design here at all, to that that form of performing, because they're not people sat at breakfast tables talking to one another. And yes, there are those moments, and yes, there will be ways around those moments, but you don't have to even think about it too much.
Like you say, some of those really important issues that I know your players have always continued to challenge, that have always really engaged young people, from my experience both in the UK and
Good.
then over here as well. They really radiate with the young people. With that then, thinking about live theatre, you touched upon it a little bit there. They obviously are becoming more available on virtual platforms now, and this theatre is going through a dramatic shift from stage to screen almost. Do you believe that these new formats are here to stay, or do you think when things open up, people will crave to return to the theatre, or have we now adapted to something different?
Oh, it won't replace, but it'll for you are you in Dubai still?
I am, yes.
Yeah, I can remember when I was in Dubai, people were saying they got some really good theatre coming out there, but it wasn't very much.
Yes.
And one of the not very much was, I think in Dubai there's been a tour of Chicken, and that's it. So it's been great, the schools who have managed to access Chicken, but now schools can access Hard to Swallow, I Love You Mum, and then the DVDs are being made available through a streaming service this week. That's all happening through Salamander Street. So again, and that won't be instead of, that will be as well as. And I know there was some concern when Tie It Up started to, I didn't have this concern, but there was concern by some people, oh, you're putting it onto a virtual platform, is that good for the play? Absolutely, it's good for the play. It means more people get access to it, more people can see it. And I think that doesn't stifle live performances. That will make a live performance more interesting. So my theory is, if Tie It Up's production is really good, then people see it. People in Dubai won't say, oh, we don't want to see that live. It would be great if we could have that over. So they might get an invitation over there to perform live. That's my theory. I have no idea whether it works, but I just think the more different ways of performing, and this is 2 extra ways of putting a play out there, and I think that's absolutely wonderful.
Totally agree with you. As I know, I mean, I've been here for 7 years, but theatre is really just up and coming now, so it's becoming a really exciting time for us, and I think maybe virtual platforms will then hopefully springboard into more live theatre when this sort of pandemic is finished, hopefully. And
my son is involved in circus, so he's in a troupe called the Barely Methodical Troupe. And the same is happening in circus, and they've changed the way. We went to a circus in the summer, and they had a kind of supper circus where they didn't have everybody sat in the same way in a ring. They had the tent, but they had people at dinner tables, socially distanced, in groups, and it was lovely. It was really, really perfect.
What a talented family as well. Fantastic. Next question then. The performing arts, then, as we all know, has been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic, unfortunately, with theatres still not being able to open, etc. Do you have any advice for students who want to continue within the industry at this stage?
That's a really tough one, because I can remember as a teacher, I was always very reluctant to kind of push people towards the performing arts. And I can remember the guy who played Graham in Race to Be Seen, he wanted to become an actor. And as a drama teacher, I said, don't, you're not going to get employed. And what he did was to go against my advice, and he went out and did it, and he had a career, partly directing Too Much Punch for Judy, doing other things as well, and he had a fully fledged career. I saw him as the exception proves the rule until I had my own children, who we certainly didn't push into theatre, but they made the decision that they wanted to do it. Now, interestingly, Charlie, the middle one, did a degree in circus. He is the only person other than one other in his year group who has ended up working in the field that his degree was about. All the others have got degrees in whatever that sound kind of really appropriate, but they're not doing anything related to that degree. My eldest son went into plumbing, and we were really excited about that. And we said, great, you'll always need a plumber. That's brilliant. It was great until the last term of that course, where you have to get a work experience, and the college promised us they'd get a work experience, but they didn't. And his dad's a drama teacher. I knew no one who was a plumber. He didn't get a work experience. That whole 2 years was thrown away. And it's an absolute scandal that he was put on this course with all the promises of you'll get a job. And it ended up being good experience for him, and he's now working in renovating old ships into new ships. So he's doing well, but nothing related to that sixth form training that he got. And Daisy, who's my youngest, is a singer, and she went to a PPA in Guildford, and she ended up working on cruise ships and having the time of her life for 2 years. And what that's taught me, a bit late because I'm now not a teacher, is whatever it is you want to do, be it acting or maths or whatever, if you've got a passion for it, you'll make it work. So if you haven't got a passion, don't bother.
I think that's exactly right. I think some of the advice I was always given is if you're thinking about your plan B, then your plan A probably isn't the passion that you want it to be. So if you're already thinking what the backup is, you're probably not ready for it. Lovely. Yeah. Are there any sort of playwrights or practitioners that particularly inspire you then?
Yes, John Godber, when he was, not so much recently, I don't think his output recently has been, I haven't been particularly impressed, but Teachers, I can remember watching that for the first time, utterly adoring it. And it was always a guaranteed success to take kids to watch it. Around that time also Trestle Theatre, who were a mask company, they taught us, so with the Graham Race to be Seen play, we didn't know that you could have scenery on a stage, and we couldn't afford to have it, so we just literally had an empty set. What Trestle taught me is that you can make the stage look interesting before a play begins. So when we got to Hard to Swallow, which was about 5 years later, and we'd seen Trestle, we set up the stage in an interesting way, inexpensively, but we did that. Cheek by Jowl, who were the first group to manage to make Shakespeare accessible to me. So, yeah, they did. I saw a Midsummer Night's Dream and a Macbeth that I thought was absolutely outstanding, and I went kind of reluctantly. People had said, "Oh, I think you'll really enjoy it." I said, "No, I won't." Yes, I did. Absolutely stunning. So Cheek by Jowl, right. More recently, Paper Birds. I've seen their productions, and I think they're just wonderful. And I have to say, the people like Tie It Up, who are doing my own work, I mean, they inspire me because I go and watch them doing Hard to Swallow, and they've brought something to that I hadn't put in the original production. So I end up, and drama teachers, I go to schools, the school who did Game Over, I went to see their performance of that. It was in Hertfordshire, a school called Beaumont School. I get inspired by that because they do different things with my play. There's a school in Haverhill in Norfolk called Samuel Ward, who every year do one of my plays and invite me to go and watch it. And I always go because I know what they'll do with it will bring something new for me that I hadn't seen before. And that in turn allows me to do my work better. So my going to the theatre is often, sadly in a kind of, you know, a very arrogant way, just to see what other people are doing with my work. I'm trying to think what the last play I saw was The Last Temptation of Boris Johnson, which was one of the best plays I've ever seen. And that again it's been produced by Salamander Street. It's a Jonathan Maitland play. He also did a play about Jimmy Savile, which was stunning. So though Jonathan Maitland's work is really worth looking at, the Boris Johnson one is absolutely remarkable.
Interesting. So lovely to hear some new things to read and hear that, like I say, you're, you know,
you will not go wrong with the Boris Johnson. It's just the best play. It deals with the lead up to Brexit and then travels 20 years forward to what all the people who were involved in that decision are doing at that point. And marvellous. And Jonathan Maitland used to, I can remember him being on That's Life or something when I was a little child, and he's now producing these astounding plays.
It's still so relevant, like say, for our younger generations and how we can learn from them. Fantastic. Yeah. So with that then, is there any advice that you would give to teachers of drama that are wanting to use your work within their classroom? Is there anything you would advise them, or any tips that are the best way to work with them, or anything?
Be creative. I think that the nice thing about my plays, because I was a teacher, is they actually are written for young people to perform. So most of the plays, and one of the reasons why I wanted to write plays, is that I was finding I can't find a play that is suitable for this group. So the ones that I was writing were suitable for this group. And they also allow the group's ownership over how it's staged, because very purposely, and I was criticised for this early on, very purposely I don't put stage instructions. So I don't tell people how to do it. It gives them an opportunity to figure out how they should do it. And I think at first it put people off. I think latterly people have actually been quite excited by that. And I've done books on my plays and the story behind them. So Hard to Swallow, Easy to Digest, and the story behind Too Much Punch for Judy. And they kind of describe the journey through creating the plays. And I think to know those stories, if you're studying them, in England, they're set texts. So I think go to the horse's mouth and read the background if you're studying them. If you're performing them, you certainly don't need to do that. But just have fun with them. And that's my next book that I've just finished writing at the moment is called Verbatim: The Fun of Making Theatre Seriously. That's always been my kind of little motto. We're doing it for the fun of doing it seriously. That's the really important thing.
It's lovely to see that, like you say, students are able to access your work to see that it's very much a process. You don't just write down one day and a play comes, but actually there's a process of development and evolution in your ideas with it. So
that would take a year or two.
Yes, I think people underestimate that.
Yeah, they look at things like Stop the Traffic and think, oh, you did this and you won all these awards. Yes, but we started in September. We worked for a whole year, and the following Christmas, a year and a bit on, we did the first preview to the Stop the Traffic organisation, who gave us some feedback. At Easter, after that, so a year and 2 terms away, we did our first performance and got adjudicated. And then in the following summer, we might go to Edinburgh or something. It's a lot of work, and that was 3 3-hour rehearsals a week, every week of the school term, for a year and over a year and a half. And my head teachers had to put up with no production in that time, and just trusting that we're going to come up with something.
That dedication to it, but also doing the stories justice, if you're basing on real people as well.
Yeah.
With that then, of your most successful work, of which there's huge amounts of it, did you always know they were going to be successful, or was there one that surprised you with its popularity? Yes,
there are some I thought should have been successful and weren't. Mm-hmm. So some examples of those. I did a musical, which I did as a zigzagger for girls, which was called, it's had various titles, Sweet F.A., No Place for a Girl, and Lethal in the Box. We did it, we took it to Edinburgh, we got stunning reviews, and because I wasn't a known playwright, it just sunk without a trace, and it was taken on by a publisher who didn't publicise in the way that it would have needed. But it was a play about a girl struggling to play football, soccer, in a world that thought girls shouldn't play football. I'm revisiting it now, all these years later. I'm working with a footballer from Southampton, a female footballer from Southampton, who's going to kind of do a goggle box on it. And she's going to look at it, and she said, I predict we will see that we haven't moved on as much as you'd like to think we have moved on. And I'm fascinated to do that. I'm just so busy at the moment doing all the republishing with Salamander Street that I haven't got around to it. But that's a project that is earmarked for the future. I wrote a play about David Bowie, and that didn't take off, and that's really surprised me, because that should have done. Can You Hear Me, Major Tom, after he died, I would have thought that would be of huge appeal. And then you write a play about drink driving, and suddenly the world wants to see it, and that certainly wasn't written for that reason. And there are some where I wrote it so much later on. I Love You, Mum, I Promise I Won't Die, which is probably my most successful recent play. I did think this is going to do really well, and it did, and it's really good, so it should do. But that's a much longer play. It's a 2-act play. What I like about that is that I started to mess around with structure, so the first half of the play goes forward in time and the second half of the play goes backwards. So if you look at some of the more recent plays, when people say to me, which of your road safety, because I've done 5 now, which of your road safety plays would you recommend? It's always the one that no one will have heard of, called Checkered Flags to Checkered Futures, which I did in Hong Kong at first, actually, or was performed in Hong Kong, commissioned by a school in Hong Kong. And it is wonderful because you've got a really interesting structure in it, whereas Too Much Punch for Judy is kind of the story. And Checkered Flags has got the story of a young guy who's going to be a world champion rally driver, and then suddenly he's a passenger in a car and he loses his leg as a result of someone else's driving. And the person who's the other passenger was the owner of the car, who just said to this girl she can drive but hadn't covered the insurance, so he lost his money, and then the girl who was driving had brain damage. So it's kind of just an amazingly sad story, but you've got this contrasting story of I'm going to be a world champion, so you have the 2 stories running together, and I think it's far more interesting to do that than the straightforward Too Much Punch for Judy. There's nothing wrong with Too Much Punch, it does its job, but if you're looking for a better road safety play, I'd say have a look at, and for a change as well, why do people always want to do the same thing?
But a reminder of how important stories are, and that storytelling, and people want to listen. Okay, just before we finish up then, Mark, you mentioned a few bits and pieces that you've got out there. Do you want to just let people know what is available to them as resources that they might be able to buy or get hold of, having been inspired by what you've said today?
Well, that's really nice of you. And one thing is, I've got a book of monologues, and obviously my plays lend themselves particularly well to that. So Act Normal, and again published by Salamander Street, and they very cleverly, if you look my name up on YouTube, on anything, if you spell it incorrectly without the double L, it won't come up. So it's Mark Wheeler with 2 E's and 2 L's. And when I was doing that, my daughter said, you need to do one with duologues in it as well. So I don't know whether you can see it. Yeah, and the titles, my son said, don't have some title that doesn't relate to anything. Have a title that comes from one of the characters. So this is from a play called Gate Escape, and the line is, can't believe I'm saying this to my mum, contemporary duologues. So Salamander Street, that's just salamanderstreet.com. You can get copies of them in any country easily, apparently, I'm told. And so that's hard copies. You can also get the ebook versions as well. And Checkered Flags is out with Salamander Street. That was they've published now 8 of my plays. Okay. And if you're looking for a more classical thing, their most recent one is my adaptation of Silas Marner, which I did as a verbatim, using as the source material the book. And I think for English teachers, that's a really interesting one, in that you get the whole book in a very readable form that you can read around the class in an hour. And you get the original words, so it kind of uses those words. And I've got a store, wheelerplaysstore.co.uk, which is open until February, and everything is moving over to Salamander Street. And then, of course, there's the tie it up thing. But the nice thing about what I've produced is that it looks attractive. I don't know whether random pages that I'm showing there. So these books about the plays, students can read them, teachers can enjoy reading them, and they're a story, but they're set out in a much more interesting way than I try to avoid being academic, because that would put me off.
It's very for them.
I hope so, yeah. And it reads like a story. So the Too Much Punch for Judy thing is great because you hear the story of a group struggling to get the play and will we do it, will we not? And then what happened to her, that she went on to have a second accident afterwards, you know, and that story in quite some detail. And working with Salamander Street has been really interesting because I've managed to do re-edits. So Too Much Punch for Judy that they've published has got a new edit of the opening bit. So all the plays have got new aspects to them, which has been really good to do, or additional bits put in them. Hard to Swallow has got all the Billy Goat scenes that we had 6 of them. So I discovered them. Yeah, thank you.
So many different resources. I know myself, I'll be getting the monologues and duologues. It's part of the GCSE. We run Lambda. We're always trying to find new monologues and trying to be, you know, like say, inventive and creative with them. So that's amazing.
And again, it won't just be the plays that you've heard of. So you've got a monologue in there in the monologue book of one of the teachers talking to the girl playing football, which is one of the best monologues I've come across, I think, where she tells the story of Sarah's reaction to not being able to become a footballer as an 8-year-old, and it's heartbreaking.
Amazing. Like I say, fantastic resources, even more so now with what's happening. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you again, Mark, for such useful and insightful information. And then, like Mark just mentioned, information on how you can purchase any of his resources can be found on our BSME network pages, or like the web pages that he just said as well. And if you have any questions, I'm sure we can fire them on to him afterwards. He may well be able to give us a little bit of time to pass that back. So thank you again, Mark. Thank you, Zena, for earlier. Please remember to share this webinar with your colleagues at school then. A recorded version will be available early next week on the Drama Network page. And as BSME members, you're also eligible to watch the webinars in any of our networks, including Teaching and Learning, Leadership Matters, and Safeguarding. If you have any questions on the webinar, please put them on the discussion on the network page and engage with us rather on the discussion forums. It's our tool to be able to support one another. So if you have any specific resources you'd like to share, please load them on the resources area. Our next webinar there is on Thursday, the 21st of January, where we will be hearing from Paul Spicer, who's the Creative Director of ArtsEd International, and Jodie Quirk from GEMS Wellington Silicon Oasis, as we discuss bridging the gap and audition technique for any of your students that might be looking for a career in the performing arts, and hopefully a nice lead on from some of the points Mark made regarding going into this in the future. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and please join us again for the next one. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody, and stay safe.